lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family.
The palace gates may look unshakable, but one moment changed everything. When King Charles lifted the trunk of Camilla's son's car, he never imagined what lay hidden inside. It wasn't jewels, it wasn't gold, it was something darker, something that reopened wounds the monarchy tried to bury forever. What followed was no ordinary family quarrel. Prince William's reaction was explosive, raw, and unlike anything Britain had ever seen from him before. This wasn't just about a trunk, it was about truth, betrayal, and a son standing for his mother's memory. What William did next shook the crown to its core. The royal family's fragile balance. The royal family often looks perfect from the outside. Cameras catch the smiles, the waves, and the glittering crowns. But inside the palace walls, things are not as calm as they appear. Behind the gold curtains lies tension, old wounds, and secrets that could tear everything apart. King Charles had finally become king after waiting longer than any heir in history. To the world, he was the ruler of a nation. But to his own family, he was still a man with flaws, carrying mistakes from the past. His choices, especially about love, had left scars that never healed. Beside him stood Queen Camilla. Once, she was the most hated woman in Britain. Many blamed her for the heartbreak of Princess Diana. Years had passed, and she was now crowned as queen, yet many still whispered behind closed doors. She was accepted, yes, but never fully loved by the people. And for Diana's sons, her presence was even harder to swallow. Prince William, the heir to the throne, carried himself with calm discipline, but inside he had never forgiven the way his mother was treated. For him, Camilla was not just a stepmother. She was the woman who replaced Diana in his father's life. He kept his distance, smiling in public, but his heart held quiet anger. Prince Harry walked a different road. Once close to William, he broke away, choosing life in America with Meghan. His words and interviews cut deep, exposing family pain. He felt overshadowed, unwanted, and haunted by his mother's loss. His truth created cracks in the family image, cracks that grew wider every day. And then there was Camilla's other family. Her son, Tom Parker Bowles, lived in a world far from royal duties. A food writer and critic, he had no crown, no title, yet he was tied to the monarchy through his mother. For William, Tom's presence was uncomfortable. Tom was a reminder of Camilla's life before Charles, a reminder of how much space she had taken in his father's heart. The palace tried to pretend everything was normal. Dinners were polite, smiles were rehearsed, photographs showed unity. But inside the family, the balance was thin, like glass ready to shatter. Every meeting could turn cold. Every word could spark a storm. This was the fragile state of the royal family, a family standing together in public but divided in private. And soon, one shocking night would break that balance in a way no one expected: the banquet where it all happened. When Camilla married Charles, Tom's name became tied to the crown whether he wanted it or not. Suddenly, people looked at him differently. To the press, he was the Queen's son. To William and Harry, he was something else entirely, an outsider walking inside their world. Tom was polite with William, but the distance was always there. William carried memories of Diana, and Tom reminded him of Camilla's deep place in his father's life. Every time Tom appeared at family events, it felt like a silent intrusion. Not because Tom misbehaved, he rarely did, but because his very presence stirred emotions no one spoke about aloud. Camilla, however, adored her son. He was her pride, her comfort, and her shield against the cruelty she had faced from the public. When the newspapers tore her apart during the Diana years, Tom stood by her. That loyalty meant everything to her, and she wanted Charles to treat him with the same care. Charles tried. He welcomed Tom with handshakes, warm words, even inside jokes. But William noticed. He noticed the small moments, the easy smiles, the way Charles sometimes seemed more relaxed with Tom than with his own sons. Those moments burned quietly in William's heart. He never shouted, never complained, but the hurt was there. To the world, Tom was harmless. But to William, he was a reminder that Camilla's family had blended into theirs without permission. A reminder that Diana's place had been rewritten. At royal events, Tom stood carefully at the edge of the stage. He knew he was not royal. He did not bow to crowds or wave from balconies, but the cameras still caught him. Every time his face appeared in the newspapers, readers whispered, "That's the Queen's son. Will he get a title? Will he inherit something?" Those whispers troubled William deeply. The monarchy had rules. Bloodlines mattered, yet Camilla's son was now woven into palace life, a man with no royal blood but a front-row seat to royal secrets. And then came the night of the grand banquet. The palace was glowing, its golden lights shining across London. Guests arrived in fine gowns and black suits. Leaders, nobles, and celebrities filled the grand hall. For the family, it was meant to be a night of unity, a chance to show the world that the crown was strong. But behind the scenes, tension boiled. William watched Tom from across the room. He saw him talking freely with Charles, laughing as though he belonged. To William, it was a painful sight, and yet none of them knew what was waiting outside, in the shadows of the palace car park. Because later that night, King Charles would walk toward Tom's car, and in that car trunk, he would find something that would set off a storm no one could control. The royal banquet night. The night of the banquet was supposed to be a celebration. Buckingham Palace glowed like a jewel, every window lit, every chandelier prepared to shine. Outside the gates, crowds gathered, waving flags and pressing against the railings for a glimpse of the royals. Inside, staff moved quickly and silently, making sure nothing was out of place. Silver plates were polished until they gleamed. Wine glasses sparkled in rows. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and polished wood. For the royal family, banquets were not just dinners. They were performances, grand displays of power, tradition, and unity. The king knew the world was watching. Leaders from across Europe, ambassadors, and celebrities were all in attendance. This was Charles's chance to show strength, to show that the monarchy stood steady under his reign. William arrived first, with Catherine. She was the perfect picture of grace, dressed in a deep emerald gown, a color that caught the light and made her glow. The cameras outside adored her, as they always did, but William's face was harder to read. He smiled when needed, but his eyes revealed little. Then came Charles and Camilla. They walked slowly, hand in hand, as though nothing could touch them. Camilla wore a silver gown with jewels that shimmered across her neckline. The public cheered, though not as loudly as they did for Catherine. Charles lifted his hand in a royal wave, but his mind was elsewhere. Because tonight, Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, was also invited. He stepped out of a sleek black car, his suit sharp, his hair carefully combed. To most guests, he was simply another name on the list, but to William, his presence cast a shadow over the evening. William noticed immediately. The cameras caught Tom arriving, and William's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Inside the palace, music filled the hall. A string orchestra played softly as guests entered the dining room. The tables stretched endlessly, covered in white cloth, golden plates, and endless rows of crystal glasses. Every seat was marked with careful precision. Every detail was perfect. As the guests took their places, conversations rose like gentle waves. Leaders spoke of politics, nobles spoke of land, and celebrities whispered about who was seated where. But at the head of the table, the royal family carried the greatest weight. Every look, every gesture was being watched. Charles raised his glass to make a toast. His voice was steady, his words polished. He spoke of unity, of history, of the bond between nations. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Yet even as he smiled, his eyes drifted to Camilla and then almost unconsciously to Tom. William noticed. Through the dinner, Tom sat only a few seats away from Charles. He laughed easily, his voice carrying across the table. He spoke to ministers about food, about restaurants, about life outside palace walls. Some found him charming, others curious. But William's gaze never softened. To him, Tom's laughter felt out of place, like a sound that didn't belong in the royal hall. Harry was absent that night. Across the ocean, he had chosen a different life, one far from palace dinners. His empty chair was a reminder of the family split, a crack that no toast could hide. As the night went on, the wine flowed and the hall filled with warmth. Guests clapped politely after speeches. Cameras captured smiles that looked natural enough. But under the table, William's fists tightened. Under the chandeliers, Charles's thoughts grew restless, because something about Tom's arrival that night felt different. When the banquet ended, guests began to leave in carriages and cars. The palace grew quieter. The music faded, the laughter drifted away, and only the royals and their closest circle remained. Charles excused himself, telling Camilla he needed a moment of air. He walked slowly through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing against the marble. He stepped outside into the crisp night air of the courtyard. The stars above were faint, hidden by London's lights, but the air was sharp enough to wake him. Guards stood at their posts, silent and watchful. Charles walked toward the line of cars waiting near the edge of the palace. Black vehicles gleamed under the lanterns, engines quiet, chauffeurs waiting patiently. And there, among them, was Tom's car. Charles slowed his steps. Something pulled him closer. He could not explain it, whether it was instinct, suspicion, or simply curiosity. But his eyes fixed on the car. The trunk. He noticed it wasn't fully shut. A small gap, almost invisible, but enough to draw attention. He frowned. Why would Tom's trunk be left open at the palace, of all places? Security was always tight. Every car was checked before entering. Nothing was ever left unsealed. And yet, there it was. Charles glanced around. No one moved. The guard stared ahead, unaware of his growing unease. Slowly, carefully, Charles stepped toward the car. His hand hovered for a moment, then pressed against the trunk. He lifted it, and in that single moment, the night changed. Inside, hidden beneath a dark cloth, was something that froze Charles in place. His face went pale. His breath caught. He could not believe what his eyes were seeing, and before he could speak, before he could call anyone over, a voice broke the silence behind him. It was William. "Father," he said, his tone sharp, "what are you doing?" Charles turned, his hand still on the trunk, his heart racing. William's eyes darted past him toward the open car, and the moment he saw what was inside, his entire expression shifted. Shock, anger, something else that no camera would ever capture. The fragile balance of the royal family had finally cracked. The discovery. Charles stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the trunk. The cold night air pressed against his skin, but he barely felt it. His eyes were locked on what lay inside. At first, it looked like a bundle of black fabric. But as his gaze adjusted, the shape beneath became clear. His breath grew heavy, his pulse racing faster. Inside the trunk were stacks of documents and sealed envelopes tied with red string. Old, worn, and marked with stamps from government offices. On top of them, sitting almost proudly, was a single folder with bold letters across it. Diana Confidential. Charles staggered back a step, as though the word itself had struck him. Why would Tom, Camilla's son, be carrying files about Diana? Private files, files that should have been locked deep inside palace archives, never to be seen by outsiders. William moved closer. His face, calm moments ago, now twisted with fury. His eyes darted across the contents of the trunk, his jaw tightening. He didn't speak at first, he simply stared, his chest rising and falling with growing rage. Finally, his voice cut through the silence. "Why does he have these?" William demanded, his words low but sharp. "How did he even get them?" Charles tried to respond, but no words came. He shut the trunk halfway, then opened it again as though hoping the sight would change. But the papers remained. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Letters, reports, photographs. Some were marked top secret. Others carried Diana's name in bold black ink. Memories flooded Charles's mind. Memories of his late wife, her tragic death, the endless conspiracy theories that followed. He remembered the investigations, the rumors of hidden files. But those records were supposed to be sealed away forever. Only a handful of people had ever been allowed near them. And yet, here they were, in the trunk of Camilla's son's car. William's voice grew louder. "Father, this is not an accident. These files didn't walk here on their own. Someone gave them to him, or he stole them." The anger in William's eyes was not just about the files. It was about loyalty, about betrayal. To him, this was proof that Camilla's family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Diana's memory was sacred. No outsider had the right to touch it. Charles raised his hand as though to calm him. "William, wait. We don't know—" But William cut him off. "Don't defend him. Don't you dare defend him. My mother's life, her pain, her death, it's here in his car. And you expect me to believe it's nothing?" His words echoed through the courtyard, sharper than any blade. Guards shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Charles felt torn in two. On one side stood his son, the future king, his voice filled with rightful anger. On the other side was Camilla, his wife, the woman he had fought so hard to protect. And at the center of it all was Tom, her son, now tied to a secret that could bring ruin to the crown. Charles leaned closer to the trunk again, pulling out a single envelope. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter written in Diana's handwriting, familiar, elegant, unmistakable. His throat tightened as he read the first lines. It was one of Diana's old private letters, written during her darkest days. His hand shook. He could barely continue. These were not just records. These were fragments of Diana's very soul. William's eyes burned with fire. He pointed at the trunk, his voice breaking with rage. "This ends now. Either we confront him tonight or I will. But one thing is clear, Father. If you protect him, if you protect them again, you will lose me." For the first time, Charles realized the true danger before him was not only the files, it was the fracture between him and his son. Tom Bowles' excuse. Bowles was returning to his car. His shoes tapped against the stones of the courtyard. He walked casually, unaware of what was waiting. The sight of Charles and William standing by his car made him slow down. His eyes flicked from their faces to the open trunk, and in that instant, he knew. William stepped forward first. "Explain this," he demanded, pointing to the pile of documents. His voice was low, but the rage inside it was impossible to miss. Tom froze. His face shifted from surprise to something else, calculated calm. He looked at William, then at Charles, and finally at the open trunk. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said slowly. "Don't lie to me," William snapped. "These are private files about my mother. Where did you get them?" Tom raised his hand slightly as if to defend himself. "Listen, I didn't steal anything. Someone gave them to me. I was told they were food for a book project." "A book project?" William's voice dripped with disbelief. "You expect us to believe this? That Diana's personal letters, government reports, and secret files were handed to you for a cookbook?" Tom's calm mask slipped for a second. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward Charles. But Charles wasn't defending him. The king looked broken, torn between his duty to the crown and his loyalty to Camilla's son. "Tell the truth, Tom," Charles finally said, his tone heavy. "Where did these come from?" Tom hesitated. His lips parted, then closed again. His silence was louder than any denial. William stepped closer, his voice shaking with fury. "You had no right. These are my mother's words, her pain, her truth, and you're hiding them like stolen treasure." Guards began to glance in their direction. They couldn't hear the words, but they could feel the tension, the sharp edge of danger hanging in the night air. Charles waved them back. This was not for strangers' eyes. This was a storm inside the family. Tom finally spoke. His voice was low, almost defensive. "I didn't go looking for these. They came to me. A man I've worked with before, someone who deals in rare documents, said he had information. He said it was about Diana and that people would pay millions for it. I didn't believe him at first, but when he showed me, I couldn't look away. I took them just to keep them safe." William's face twisted in disbelief. "Safe? In your trunk? Safe where anyone could have found them? Or were you waiting for the right moment to sell them?" "No," Tom's voice cracked. "I would never sell them. I don't care about the money. I thought if I kept them hidden, nobody else could use them." But William didn't believe a word. To him it was simple. Diana's life had been invaded yet again, and this time by someone tied to the family by blood of marriage. Charles closed the trunk with a heavy slam. The sound echoed across the courtyard. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the car. He looked at Tom, his eyes filled with something between anger and sorrow. "Do you realize what you've done?" he said quietly. "Do you have any idea what this could mean if the world finds out?" Tom tried to speak, but Charles raised a hand to silence him. The king turned toward William. "We must deal with this carefully. If this gets out, the press will feast on it. They will tear us apart. They will drag Diana's memory through the mud again." William shook his head. "No, father. The time for silence is over. Too much has already been hidden. Too much has already been buried. My mother's truth deserves more than a trunk in the dark." He wasn't just speaking about Tom. He was speaking about Charles himself, about the years of secrecy, the palace cover-ups, the lies wrapped in smiles. Tom stepped back, his face pale. He could feel the weight of William's anger, the king's disappointment, and the shadow of Diana herself pressing down on him. He had no allies in that courtyard, no one to defend him. The silence stretched again, long and heavy. Then William took a deep breath. His voice, though calmer now, was even more dangerous. "Tomorrow I will tell Catherine everything, and if Camilla doesn't know yet, she will. You cannot bury this, father. You cannot protect him, not this time." Charles closed his eyes. His heart felt heavy with the impossible choice before him. To shield Tom would mean betraying William. To expose Tom would mean breaking Camilla's heart. Either way, the crown would bleed. The trunk clicked shut again, but the mystery was far from closed. Questions hung in the night like ghosts. Who gave Tom the files? Why now? What else was hidden among those papers? And most of all, what would William do next? William's unexpected reaction. The palace was quiet, but inside William's chest a storm was raging. His hands shook, his breath came heavy, and his eyes burned with fury. He could no longer hold it in. The trunk was closed now, but the image of Diana's private letters and secret files refused to leave his mind. He turned on his father. "This is what happens when you let them in," William spat, his voice sharp, each word like a strike. "This is what happens when you try to replace my mother with someone else's family." Charles froze. He had heard his son angry before, but this was different. This was fire. This was pain ripping open after years of silence. "William," Charles began, but his son cut him off. "No!" William shouted, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Don't try to calm me. Don't tell me to be silent, not this time. My mother's life, her death, her pain, it's here in that trunk. And who has it? Not the palace, not me, not Harry, him, Camilla's son. How dare you let this happen?" Tom stood frozen near the car, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but William pointed at him with a trembling finger. "Stay quiet," William hissed. "You don't deserve to speak my mother's name." William stepped closer to Charles, his eyes locked on his father's. "All my life I've had to smile in front of cameras. I've had to pretend everything was fine, pretend this family was whole. But it wasn't. It was broken the moment you chose her over Mom. And now this insult is too much." Charles tried to speak, but William's voice rose again, raw with emotion. "You always ask me to understand, to forgive, to look at the bigger picture. But tell me, Father, how am I supposed to forgive this?" "Be silent!" William roared, his face red with anger. "You don't belong here. You never did. You're nothing but a shadow, clinging to the crown through your mother's marriage. And now you've stolen what isn't yours." Tom flinched at the words, but William's fury didn't stop there. He turned back to Charles, his voice trembling. "If you protect him, if you defend this, then you've chosen her family over your own, over me, over Harry, over Mom's memory." Charles's shoulders sagged under the weight of the words. He looked old, tired, crushed between two impossible worlds. He wanted to tell William to calm down, to think of the monarchy, to think of the scandal. But deep down he knew his son was right. Still, he tried to soften the storm. "William, please, this isn't the place. Let us handle this quietly." But William shook his head violently. "No. Quiet is what killed her. Quiet is what let lies spread, what let the press destroy her. Quiet is what broke this family. I won't be quiet anymore." Camilla's breakdown. The news reached Camilla before dawn. A single message, whispered through the halls, carried to her like a ghost. "The trunk has been opened." Her blood ran cold. She sat up in bed, the silk sheets falling around her. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. But then another knock came at her door, urgent, heavy. It was her aide, pale as paper. "Your Majesty, it's William. He knows." Camilla froze. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled. She clutched the edge of the bed, her rings digging into her skin. She had feared many things in her years at Charles' side: scandal, rejection, whispers from the press. But William's fury? That was something else. That was a fire she could never hope to put out. "What did he see?" she whispered. "The letters," her aide said softly. "Diana's. They were in Tom's car." Camilla's chest collapsed as though the air had been stolen from the room. Her greatest nightmare had come true. Diana's shadow, the ghost that had haunted her marriage, had now risen again in the most dangerous way possible. And William, the boy who had once glared at her with silent hatred, now had proof to fuel his anger. She stood on unsteady legs. "Where is Charles?" "In the courtyard, with Tom, but William has already left." Camilla's lip trembled. She pressed her hand against her chest as if to steady her heart. "Then it's too late," she whispered. "He's gone to Catherine." She pulled on her robe and walked quickly through the corridor, her slippers brushing against the stone floor. The palace felt colder than ever. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch her with judgmental eyes. She tried to lift her chin, tried to hold her dignity like a cloak around her shoulders. But inside, she was falling apart. When she reached Charles, she saw him standing by the car, looking years older, his face gray with despair. Tom lingered nearby, silent, ashamed. Camilla's eyes darted to her son. "Tom, tell me this isn't true." Tom opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His silence was enough. Her voice cracked. "You fool! Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed everything. You've ripped open wounds that never healed. You've given William the weapon he has always wanted." "Mother, I didn't steal them," Tom finally said. "I only found them. I was keeping them safe." "Safe?" Camilla's voice turned sharp, nearly shrieking. "You call this safe? Locked in a car trunk waiting to be discovered? Safe from whom, Tom? From William? From the king? From me?" Her hands shook so badly she pressed them against her sides to hide it. She turned to Charles, her eyes burning. "Do you see what's happened? Do you see what he's done? William will never forgive me for this. Never!" Charles reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "No, don't touch me. Not now. This is the end. He will go to Catherine and then to the press. And then—" her voice broke. "And then I'll be nothing more than the wicked stepmother who tried to bury Diana twice." The words echoed in the courtyard like a curse. Charles closed his eyes, fighting the sting of tears. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that William would calm down, that time would heal. But even he did not believe it. Camilla's mind raced back to the early days when every newspaper had painted her as the villain. She had fought so hard year after year to step into the light, to be accepted, to be crowned beside Charles. And now, with one cruel twist of fate, it was all slipping away. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto a stone bench. Her body shook as sobs tore through her chest. She tried to cover her face with her hands, but her cries broke through the still night air. Charles knelt beside her. "Camilla, please, don't fall apart. We must think, we must act." But she could not stop. Tears streaked her face. Her voice was raw, desperate. "He will hate me forever, Charles. He always hated me, but now he has a reason. He'll tell the world I destroyed his mother. He'll turn the people against me. The crown will slip from my head before it's even secure." Tom, shaken, stepped forward. "Mother, I'll explain to William. I'll tell him the truth." "No!" Camilla shouted, her voice trembling. "Stay away from him. You'll only make it worse. He doesn't want your truth. He wants vengeance. He wants blood." The courtyard fell silent again, except for her sobbing. Even the guards looked away, ashamed to witness the queen consort unraveling. Finally, Charles placed his hand over hers despite her resistance. "We will face this together," he whispered, "no matter what William does, no matter what happens next." But deep down, Camilla knew she was standing at the edge of ruin. One move from William, one word from his lips, and the fragile acceptance she had built over decades would crumble. She buried her face in her hands and whispered the words that chilled Charles to the bone. "Diana has won. Even in death, she has won." And with that, Camilla broke completely. The public explosion. The palace gates could no longer hold the storm. For 2 days, whispers had grown louder, and by the third morning, the world outside Buckingham Palace was boiling with questions. Reporters crowded every corner, their microphones raised, their voices cutting through the air. Is Prince William fighting with the king? Did Camilla's son really take Diana's private letters? Has the monarchy fallen into another scandal? The palace issued no statement. Silence was meant to protect them. But silence became the loudest answer of all. And then it happened. William broke the wall. He stepped out of Kensington Palace with Catherine at his side. The cameras exploded with flashes, the noise almost deafening. Normally, William would wave politely, say a few careful words, and retreat. But not today. Today, his eyes were cold, his shoulders stiff, his jaw locked in fury. He raised his hand for silence, and shockingly, the press obeyed. His voice was steady, but it carried fire. I will not speak long, but I will speak the truth. My mother's memory deserves it. The reporters leaned forward, hearts pounding, pens racing. William continued. Recently, I discovered personal belongings of my late mother, Princess Diana, hidden in a place they should never have been. These were her private letters, her private fears, her private heart. They were not respected. They were not safe. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine lowered her eyes, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. William's tone sharpened. I will not go into details today, but I want the world to know this. My mother's dignity will not be silenced. Not by this palace, not by anyone. The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras shook. Microphones pushed forward. But William turned away, refusing to say more. Catherine placed her hand on his arm, guiding him back inside. The damage was done. Within an hour, every news station in Britain and then across the world flashed with headlines. Prince William breaks silence on Diana letters. Inside Buckingham Palace, chaos exploded. Advisors shouted across tables, phones rang endlessly, and statements were drafted and redrafted, none strong enough to stop the wildfire spreading outside. Charles sat in silence, his face pale, his hands pressed tightly together. Every word from William's mouth cut him deeper. He had begged his son to keep the matter private, but William had chosen the world instead. Camilla, on the other hand, was in despair. She locked herself in her room, refusing food, refusing counsel. Her crown felt like a curse now. The whispers she feared most were already spreading. She will never be Diana. She will never be loved. Meanwhile, the public responded with fury. Crowds gathered outside palace gates, holding pictures of Diana. They chanted her name as if she had returned from the grave to stand against the monarchy once more. The crisis grew beyond Britain. American networks replayed William's words on every channel. Commentators debated whether this was the beginning of the monarchy's collapse. Social media flooded with images of Diana, her old interviews, her famous lines about being the people's princess. For many, it felt as though she had risen again, her spirit carried in the fury of her son. Inside the palace, Charles tried one last desperate move. He sent a personal message to William. Come to me. We must resolve this as a family. Do not let the world divide us further. But William did not answer. His silence toward his father was louder than his speech to the press. Instead, he sat with Catherine, holding his head in his hands. His voice broke as he whispered, I did what she would have wanted. I protected her name, but Catherine, have I just burned the whole family with me? Catherine stroked his hair gently. You did what your heart demanded. The world may shake, but you are still her son. And they will see that. By nightfall, the royal family's image was bleeding. Newspapers carried split photos. On one side, a smiling Diana. On the other, a tear-streaked Camilla. The headlines wrote themselves, and the people chose sides. Most stood with William. Some defended Charles. But very few stood with Camilla. The monarchy, once wrapped in silence and control, was now trembling under the weight of one man's truth. The question on every lip was simple. What happens next? Charles's desperate gamble. For 2 nights, Charles barely slept. He walked the halls of Buckingham Palace like a ghost, his crown heavy on his head, his heart heavier still. William's words had struck him harder than any blow. The future of the monarchy, his own son, and the memory of the woman he once loved, all of it was now tangled in a storm that threatened to destroy everything. The advisors spoke of damage control, press statements, and silence. But Charles knew silence was no longer enough. William had forced the palace into the light. The world was demanding answers. If he did not act, the crown itself would shake loose. So Charles made his choice. At dawn, he summoned his inner circle. The room was tense, the air sharp, papers rustled as advisors laid out options. Most were weak, deny the story, blame outsiders, distract with new events. But Charles cut through them all. "No more lies," he said firmly. His voice carried the weight of a man who had decided to step into the fire. "If we hide, we fall. If we stay silent, we burn. The people must hear from me, not tomorrow, not next week, today." Gasps filled the room. One advisor stammered, "Your Majesty, you cannot—" It would be too dangerous. To admit there were letters, to admit William spoke truth. Charles's hand slammed the table. "Dangerous? The greater danger is losing the trust of my son and the people. If Diana's shadow still rules these halls, then I must face it. I will not outlive another scandal built on deceit." The room fell silent. His gamble had been declared. That afternoon, Charles prepared for a live address to the nation. Cameras were set in the throne room, the same place where he had once been crowned. But now, the room felt like a battlefield. Camilla was pale, trembling as she sat nearby. She begged him not to do it. "Charles, if you speak of her, you will bury me. Every word you say will place Diana above me, even in death, and the people will never forgive me." Charles looked at her with tired eyes. "Camilla, I have no choice. William has already spoken. The world believes him, and rightly so. If I remain silent, I will lose not only my son but the crown. I must try to bring peace, even if it costs me everything else." Tears slipped down Camilla's cheeks. She clutched his hand tightly, her voice breaking. "And what of me, Charles? Am I to stand as your queen, or as your mistake?" He whispered almost too softly to hear. "Tonight, I am only a father. A broken father." The hour came. Lights blazed, cameras pointed, and the nation watched. Charles stood tall, though inside he felt hollow. His speech was short, but every word carved deep. "My people, tonight I must speak not as your king, but as a man, as a father, and as a husband. Much has been said in recent days. Much pain has returned to the surface. And it is true. Personal letters of my late wife, Diana, have been found in a place they should never have been. This has caused deep hurt to my family, most of all to my son, William." He paused. The silence of the nation pressed against him. "I cannot erase the past. I cannot change what was lost. But I can say this. Diana was the mother of my children. She will always be honored, always be remembered, and always be respected within these walls. Any failure to protect her memory is my burden and mine alone." Cameras flashed. Charles's eyes glistened. His voice shook slightly. "I ask for patience, I ask for healing, and I ask for my son to forgive me. The crown will endure, but only if the truth endures with it." With that, the broadcast ended. The king lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. The speech was over, but the gamble had only just begun. The reaction was instant. Crowds across Britain cheered his honesty. For the first time, many felt Charles had spoken with his heart, not with rehearsed words. But others turned their cheers into chants for Diana, raising her name as if she were still alive. The press praised his courage, but they also asked dangerous questions. If Charles admits failure, is Camilla fit to be queen? If William is the defender of Diana's memory, should he lead sooner than expected? Inside the palace, Camilla collapsed in tears. She felt stripped bare before the world, her crown slipping like sand through her fingers. Her son Tom cursed under his breath, knowing the blame for the trunk would never leave him. And William? He sat in his study with Catherine and listened to his father's words in silence. When it ended, he did not cheer. He did not curse. He only whispered, "At last." He finally spoke the truth. Catherine touched his hand. "So will you forgive him?" William stared at the dark night beyond the window. His jaw was tight, his eyes still fierce. "I don't know," he said. "The truth has been spoken, but truth alone does not heal." One evening, Catherine stood by the palace window, watching the candle lights flicker below. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt afraid. The crown is not love, she thought. It is weight. And the people, in their hunger for Diana's memory, are placing that weight on us. On William. On me. That night, she wrote in her private journal words no one else would see. I love my husband, but I fear for him. I fear that his anger, if not calmed, will become the very thing that destroys him. The world may want us as their king and queen, but I only want peace for our family. I pray he remembers that the crown is not a prize, it is a burden. And burdens, if carried with anger, will break even the strongest man. Catherine closed the book and blew out the candle. The room fell dark, but her mind did not rest. She knew her silence would not last forever. One day she would need to speak. And when that day came, her words would not be for the people, not for Charles, not even for Camilla. They would be for William alone.